This is the CW Spiral, a podcast run by three survivors of the CW's colon in 2022. We're your hosts, Sabrina Reed,
Michael Patterson,
and Reed Gowden,
bringing you history about the network and the WB, the latest news and in-depth Sporterville discussions of the best and messiest shows to ever grace the small screen. Okay, so you guys, we are going to hop right into some news. Yes, we know that there has been a casting for the librarians, but we're going to save that for next pod when Reed is here. And hopefully more news comes out from the CW about what's going on with the librarians next chapter. And really, as we move into March, what's going on with the April schedule. I know Walker has a trailer. Where's Superman and Lois's trailer?
We're waiting.
Manifesting. I know. I mean, because they could drop it early, and even though it's coming in the fall, we wouldn't mind.
No, definitely. Start the teaser now. Start the promo train now. Get people excited for that final season.
Yes, please. But staying on the DC vein, the internet didn't really break, but the Flash fandom melted down in a happy way when Grant Gustin had appeared in a video saying that he would reprise the role of Barry Allen the Flash if James Gunn asked.
Y'all, it was quite the experience watching the people respond to that because I saw the original tweet of when it was posted, and about 5, 10 minutes later, the replies, the excitement about it. I mean, like, everyone thinks Grant Gustin's the definitive Flash. I know we say this on CW fans or whatever, but like as a DC fan, I say that. As a TV fan, I say that. Just people have been watching the show for the last decade, and it turned the Flash into a household name. He actually was one of the more mainstream DC superheroes, but I think the vast majority of people know him from the TV show more than they know him from the movie. You have that recognizable element there, of course. So when you see Grant now, even though the Flash was ended last year, you still look back on the whole time like that nostalgic best friend is like, oh, remember the good times, even though some of those later seasons were not good times. But it's just always nice to hear about him. And I know he's got his run on Broadway at the moment, but I mean, like, I know this came up early last year when James Gunn followed Grant, and everyone was like, could this mean that Grant's going to play the Flash in the DCU? So there's always been those rumors, there's always been those hopes, but to hear him directly acknowledge it is so exciting. And the fact that he says, because, when you do something for that long, it's totally understandable if someone wants to move on, but the fact that Grant said he would do it if James Gunn asked him to, like, he loved the role then, he clearly still loves the role now, and that would be a whole new opportunity for him. No one knows if it's ever going to happen, but I feel like we'll see the Flash on the big screen again at some point, but it would be extra super awesome if it was Grant playing him.
For sure. Like, I feel like if it was Grant playing him, it would be like a cameo situation or like a recurring role in one of the TV shows or perhaps, a smaller limited role on the big screen. I feel like, and that would be something he'd be interested in. I feel for everyone who was part of the Flash fandom when the discussion about the film was being had, Grant was interested anyway. So it would just be like another full circle moment for him, just like being able to be on Broadway like he dreamed it was. Like, I want Grant to have all of his things. And it would be wonderful if he did get to like appear as Barry Allen. Now, I will also posit if Candace Patton wants to reprise the role of Iris West. Like, yes, if not, please leave her alone. But if she does, I would be like, yes, because I'd love to see her on the big screen as well. They're in like different situations, so I guess on what they want to be doing. I would like to know what Candace wants to do. If she even wants to remain in the entertainment industry, perhaps she wants to go on another lane. But to see like two of her heroes on the screen, like I feel like all of us would be there immediately. Like even if we had no interest in necessarily the film that was coming out, though for you, Michael, you would be there for work. But
front line, yeah.
yes, but like if we weren't really that interested and they just in the trailer they just showed Grant's face or like Candace's face, we'd be like immediately the ticket is being bought.
Oh yeah.
Shall be there seated.
Oh yeah, we'd be there yesterday. No, I think that's awesome. I really do. Like we're moving into the DC universe era where the multiverse is literally a thing. Marvel's doing the multiverse. Everybody loves the multiverse. I feel like it would be honestly, I loved the Flash movie for Michael Keaton's Batman, but I love the Flash movie in general. The multiverse stuff, not that great. There were so many other options that you could have done. Like it was ridiculous that we never saw Grant, Candace make cameos. Like they were obvious, easy choices, and yet the movie overlooked them. So like I mean, like everyone loves nostalgia. Everyone loves to see other things they grew up watching or other areas of the DC world represent it. If there's a comic book based on the Flash TV series, people will be excited to see what read the stories as they continue. If there's a cameo in the DC universe, people will be excited to see those actors play those characters again. It's just everything is open now because of the idea of all these big franchises not being afraid to explore the multiverse. The original DCEO missed an opportunity there. I hope some at some point in time the DC universe doesn't, because it would be awesome to see Grant play the role again, especially on the big screen, since I personally prefer to see adventures from superheroes on the small screen, but everyone was waiting on that big moment in the Flash movie that unfortunately never came, and it was kind of disrespectful that didn't happen, considering it was so easy to make happen. I mean, like, if we're not going to have a Flash in the DC universe, we absolutely could wink, wink, and nod to the Flash of TV. If we are going to have a Flash in the DC universe, we could also wink, wink, and nod to the Flash of TV. All the options are open. Grant absolutely defined that role for a whole generation, and he will probably be renowned as the definitive Flash for at least the rest of our generation. And you know what? He deserves that title. He's still incredibly young. He could still make Barry Allen work. If at some point in his life and James Gunn's life in the DC universe aligns and they manage to make it work, I'd be all for it, because you know what? He'll always be the definitive Flash to me.
Yes, and I feel like they could have a, like a Crisis on Infinite Earth
Hmm.
situation. Not necessarily the plot, but what they had done, where we got to see the older DC shows. The amount that like everybody was screaming in those moments when we got that flashover, and it felt very communal to be like, I know that one, I know that one. Like,
Right.
did you watch that one? There's such an opportunity to pay homage to what came before. And one of the things that I have always been sort of concerned about in terms of moving forward when it comes to the DC franchise as a whole, in terms of the filmed media, right, film and television, is that because of the Arrows being on the CW, that it won't be recognized the way it should be, even though it was like a decade takeover of TV, and should be acknowledged as such. I mean, we're literally still slowly crawling to the end of it. Like Superman and Lois will be the last thing that they air, as far as we're aware, as far as DC on the CW, DC TV on the CW, and I just feel like there's just something about the way people talk about it when when people move on that I don't want it to get lost to history because
Hmm.
it really did shape our like coming of age periods and just television in general too.
Yeah, definitely. No, it started a superhero renaissance. Like I keep saying it, we wouldn't have these Marvel shows on television or streaming if it wasn't for the success of the DC shows back a decade ago. Of course, Smallville opened things up by masquerading as a teen drama, and then it pivoted full scale superhero. Arrow started the linear superhero trend, and The Flash took it to a whole new level. We owe such a great deal to these shows. Um, and I feel like that's why I hate to make the comparison, but that's why I did bring up the Flash movie. Like it went extra with CGI to do certain things with certain cameos that we didn't necessarily need. Nobody specifically asked for, because we didn't need to use CGI to engineer cameos. Like it would have, you had Grant Gustin was right there, Tyler Hoechlin, Melissa Benoist were right there, Linda Carter's Wonder Woman was right there. They were much easier ones to make happen than using CGI to create heroes from yesterday who are no longer with us. Um, there were more obvious choices that we could have done. The Arrowverse, on the other hand, I always think Crisis on Infinite Earths did a much better job than what the Flash movie and its multiverse was trying to do, because you had like the actor who played Knox in '89 Batman reading the newspaper, making that cameo appearance. You had Brandon Routh reprise his role as Superman. You had the Birds of Prey from the TV series make an appearance. That's what the DC multiverse is to me. We're a family of different generations of DC fans can get together. I mean, I remember watching that one on TV. Someone else, I remember going to the movie theaters to see that one. DC has brought people together for generations, and the idea of the multiverse will continue to do that. I think the Flash movie only scratch the surface of that with like having Michael Keaton meet Ezra Miller. You only barely scratch the surface of that, whereas the Crisis on Infinite Earths did it with all these different properties. You had non-Arrowverse fans tuning into that just to say all these different worlds come together. And I mean, like it worked a treat, it paid off. Like, so I agree with you. I don't want, as we move on from this generation, people to forget the importance of DC TV, because by proving that those things worked on television, they were able to take them to the big screen. And I think it's important that we did never forget that, because I don't think we'd be in this era of superhero glory if it wasn't for the strength of the Arrowverse. So as we move into this new generation where we kind of leave the Arrowverse in the rear view mirror, it's okay to reel elements of it back into the next generation, because we wouldn't be here without it.
No, and so I know we have to move on to our reviews, but I'm gonna drag the soapbox out
Do that.
for us
Do
more
that.
because I just feel like I don't know about you, Michael, but My favorite superhero shows, with exception to Superman and Lois, actually didn't have massive budgets, right? There's just
Yeah,
something about the shows that stick with you, particularly because they're on linear television. Now, this is not to knock um, Marvel's TV shows on Disney Plus, but uh, out of all of them, right, WandaVision was my favorite. And it did have a budget, but the other, when I think about the superhero television that like resonated with me, it largely didn't, right? Gotham wasn't out here breaking bank.
mhm,
But it was really, really good and different. We all enjoyed Smallville. Um, the even like the 90s Superman. As a kid, I really, really enjoyed that program. I feel like there's something else that's like right on the tip of my brain that is escaping me. But I often like practical effects anyway. I
yeah.
like that we don't that because there's something about having an abundance of CGI somewhere in there, the writing falls. And I don't know what that's about. You know, I feel like the bigger the budget, sometimes the weaker the writing or the story
hmm
structure. And it's as a fan, it can be a bit aggravating because you get excited, you want there to be a good story, and instead you're mostly talking about how beautiful the movie looks or how effective the special effects were at conveying the action. But when like you stop to talk about the story, you're not really talking about much.
hmm Exactly. And I agree totally. Like my favorite shows growing up was Batman 66, Wonder Woman 75. Like those shows paved the way for what we have now. And they did it without a single use of CGI, except for when Wonder Woman spun the like big explosion that came out of her. Other than that, no CGI in that show. And I agree now. Like, it's got to the stage where you can see, oh, that's computer generated imagery. Oh, they did that practically. And a lot of the time, like again, I hate to use this example because I just recently rewatched it and really enjoyed it. The Flash movie, CGI in that movie was not good. A lot of it was not good. And smaller budgets on television managed to make far better things work. So again, the Crisis versus Flash thing. Um, I just like entertainment and I love this genre and I love when we can make the television genre work. You brought up Smallville. Half of its run was a teen drama. That's the only reason Smallville was so successful. And we may owe this superhero era to the success of Smallville, which again rode on the success of being a slightly supernatural teen drama in the same vein that Buffy was, in the same way that True Calling was. Other shows like that of its ilk, Tarzan, when you watch that, other shows of that. Smallville obviously got more heroic towards the end, but I'm sure it had a much lower budget in those early seasons when we had Clark Kent in high school. And you know what? It worked. Say you mentioned Gotham for its first season, it was a procedural. Again, made it work. We used the television medium to serve the storyline. We're not just having a superhero show on TV for no reason. That is why all of the Arrowverse shows had to follow Villain of the Week format. And you know what? In those early seasons, they understood the assignment and nailed it to perfection. Of course, it got stale after a while. Doesn't change the fact that those first couple of seasons were sensational. So, and then Legends of Tomorrow. One episode of that could be a heavy sci-fi thing set in the future, and then another episode could be set in the 90s in a police procedural. You didn't know what you were getting each week. The superhero genre does work on television, so I know to bring this back, pivot all the way back to the idea of this being a CW podcast. Brad Schwartz's comments are a couple of months ago about superheroes have had their day on TVs and they don't necessarily work anymore. To an extent, I get it because the budgets are big, but the budgets don't always have to be big, and sometimes those make for the better TV shows. So it's all we're all cool out here dragging the CGI in the Flash TV series in its final few seasons. Not enough of us are dragging the CGI in the Flash movie. So let me just like end on that note. It's not always down to special effects. Sometimes it's down to what make shows make you feel. The CW shows made me feel a lot of emotions over the decade long run, as did Grant's performance as the Flash. So like, yeah, time to respect the TV shows more, I feel.
Yes, and respect TV in general. We
Yeah,
see
yeah.
we see you film buffs.
Let
As
us
in,
let us enjoy our entertainment. This is what television was for.
exactly. They're totally different mediums, so they should not be compared in that
Yep.
way.
Exactly, exactly. Everybody loves a bit of fun on TV, and if it can entertain you from the comfort of your own home, you ain't doing nothing wrong in my books.
Mm-mm. But so then to move into Ride, which again for us enjoyable because it's different.
hmm
There's not a lot of, well, really there isn't any Western content on network TV. Uh,
No, very
uh,
true.
it's Ride right now, and then of course Walker for the CW. There was Walker Independence, which I mean, sweet spot, great writing. But so to see Ride, you know. on the CW. It is interesting. This episode for me, if I'm honest, is the my least favorite of the season. And I think it's because we were so focused on the McMurray rodeo.
Hmm.
So a lot of the plots have to drive toward the action of that plot point. But it's a great episode for Isabel, and she's
Yeah,
truly fantastic in it.
definitely. And I think you're right. I agree. We kind of lost the momentum of the overarching stories because we all had to focus on the rodeo. However, it gave Isabel something to do, which I've been rambling on for the last few weeks, feeling that she's kind of been there but not had something to do. So I really did enjoy that. And it was nice to see her almost out of her element because she's so good at what she does, and yet she was afraid that she wouldn't get this right. Of course, they got it right. Never doubted this woman for a moment. But it was nice to see her. That was a good character arc for her. It was taking a lot of what's been on her mind and what she's felt and putting it into channeling it into potentially the future of the McMurray Ranch and the rodeo concept in general. And I mean, like that man, I think I wrote his name down. I wish I didn't. Daniel Booker, what an odious human being, a horrid man. And I mean, like, you felt for her trying to pitch the stadium to him, and like you felt all the awkward meet feet moments when he was sitting watching it. But I mean, like, Isabel came through in the end, and the fact that, not to be mean, she kind of shut him up in the end, and I mean, like, she needed to do that, and so that was a fulfilling moment. I agree. I think that was my favorite part of the episode because I do love Isabel and I want it more for her, and I think she sold herself, the ranch, and the rodeo very, very well.
She did, and I think them as counterweights in the episode was very interesting because with Isabel being the matriarch of this family and a well-respected member of this community, there is not a lot of pushback when it comes to her
Mhm.
unless it's coming from typically cash. But like
Always cash.
no, but to see her in a position in which like the her family name and her position in the community is not respected the way that it was, to see her assert herself by the end and be like, look, you don't know what you're talking about. You
Hmm.
know, I do. Like this is your he was kind of being, I know Gus had said his father's kind of like that, right? Like you don't necessarily get his true feelings. What you get is what he wants you to react to. So taking that in mind, I was like, so you're acting bored, but you can't do any of this anyway, though. Like you
Hmm.
don't know anything. I get, wanting to be sure that you understand what you would be investing in to see if it is something that, even if they're very talented, is something that will turn a profit. I do get that. But the way he goes about it is very rude. But I did appreciate that Gus was spot on in his mimicking of his father. Like the actor who plays Gus was excellent during that. It did give you a preview because at first you're wondering, is he really like that? And then his
Hmm.
dad arrives at the ranch. You're like, oh, he is really like that. Like he got it
Yeah.
down to the gestures and the way he pronounces words.
Right. I know. I'm pretty sure then the father actually asked the same question at one point. Isabel was kind of like, "Here we go. He was right after all." I know because you can sense there's a bit of animosity between Jagos and his dad, and you did see that as in like, "What did you get me into? You got to stop this nonsense of all what you're interested in." And I mean, like, I think this was very good for the like exploration of the relationship between Gus and his dad because. When Gus first came in, nobody trusted him. The show wanted us to be mistrusting of him. And the longer the show has gone on, the more we've seen that Gus actually can be trusted. He's just a nice guy who's trying to distance himself from his family. When people say that in television, usually there's like something that surprises us towards the end. You're like, oh, hold on a minute, it was a ruse the whole time. Um, the more we learn about Gus, the more we see him interact with his father, the more we learn that actually he might just be kind of a decent guy who wants to distance himself from his family name. I made an observation about the show once. It was totally wrong the following week, so watch me be wrong again. I hope I'm not wrong. But I again, they did that very, very well. Fair play to the actor who played Mr. Daniel Booker because the minute I recognized him, I was like, "Oh, you've played some villains before. I don't remember what I saw you in, but I was like, I'm going to hate you." And I did hate that character. He was horrible. But I kind of almost thought it was kind of funny the way that we just went through the motions. We did the rodeo. We went through everything, and he was not enjoying himself. And the thing that made him pay attention was the fact that Isabel could not watch Cash, and she had her hat over her face. And I mean, like, people, he likes to drag rodeo and like he doesn't get it, and that's one thing. But I'm sure it's a very heart-pounding event, especially for the people who have loved ones partaking in it. We saw the effects of that in the very first episode, very first scene, let's be honest. Um, so I thought it was kind of effective that that's what ultimately softened him a little bit because he saw that there are real emotions on the line. He saw that it is like a heart-pounding kind of event to put yourself through, and that people can get hooked and invested in it. And because he had let the guard down a little bit, Isabel was able to sell him with the way that she pitched herself. She said some of the lines she wanted to say earlier, and I feel they kind of met in the middle there. So I really did enjoy that sequence. I thought they got through to him very well. They shouldn't have had to work that hard. This man was not nice, but I mean, they overcame that villain really, really well.
They did, and it was interesting to have a villain, in a because usually the for Ride, the villain is really outside of JB Wooten is the bull, I mean,
Hmm.
it's whether the bull's in the episode or it's not, it's always a specter in the plot because there's just so much heaviness, obviously, and weight around Cash's sport.
Hmm.
Which, speaking of Cash, this is the most annoying he has ever been. Like,
Without a
just
doubt.
really and truly, and it is interesting to see him. I always wonder when, like, when he has these speeches, like when he was talking to Valeria about how he doesn't like Gus because things just seem to come easy to him. I was like, first, you don't know Gus, so you don't know that, and then two, how much of things being, how much of that is you just projecting onto yourself? Because
Hmm.
I do wonder about that because we don't really know what it was like for the McMurray boys growing up. We just know where they are in life now. And he continuously talks about how he was getting into trouble. Things were hard for him in terms of being able to navigate social situations. And I'm like, yeah, but it kind of feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
He's prickly. He's not really the best communicator, and he's stubborn to the point of dangerous and reckless. Like even with his hand, like the all episode, he was hiding that palm. And I was like, y'all keep seeing him in that frame. He refuses to do anything with his hand. No one's gonna catch this.
Oh, it was hilarious. I know. I'm glad we had this was the episode that Missy had something on her mind because you literally could not have missed that. Every time someone showed up, he was like with one hand on the hip behind his back, and but while the other one was doing all the talking, I was like, this is kind of like terribly obvious. Why are you not noticing this? So I
I
do
was
like
so
that this is.
noticed.
This is like, of course, Missy had to have something on her mind, and I think they pulled that off well. Um, of course. Isabel Queen figured it out in the end, but unfortunately, it got to a situation where it shouldn't have gotten that far. But no, I agree with you totally with what you said about Cash. Um, he is very reckless in that even if he knows something's going to happen, he'll make it worse for himself. A lot of the situations he finds himself in, he makes worse for himself. Like he ended up putting that heap of pressure on himself by giving himself this 1 to 2 week window and things were going well. He didn't need to escalate matters that far. He had a really good day when he got back, but then when he was upset about Missy, he decided to have the fight with Goss. Again, didn't need to push it that far. And now those two situations he got himself into, he's reaping the results off this week, and they're not good results. Um, and then, like you said, the whole episode, hand behind the back, hand on the hip, hand in the glove, do whatever he could to keep it off. Um, Eating food with one hand, like awkwardly leaning over the counter with the other one hidden. It's just, yeah, like Cash gets himself into situations and you're just sitting there watching him, it's like, really? How did you do this? How did you make this one happen? And I mean, I do feel for him because his emotions are all over the place, but clearly he felt a certain kind of way about maybe the celebrity that his brother became and that maybe the way he wasn't treated, and I do understand that. But like you said, Gus isn't his brother. It's not the same situation. And just because Missy might be interested in Gus, that doesn't mean that she feels the same way about Cash that he feels about himself and that he's not worthy of her attention. So yeah, I struggled with Cash in this episode, especially with the fact that then we were going through the Valeria stuff as well, which I mean, like I love the scene where they all of them got together in the kitchen, and I'll get to that later. I like that because we haven't had one of those in a long time. But I love the fact that as soon as Missy was like, "This woman thought me and Cash were together," Valeria was like, "She thought you and Cash were together." She just inserted herself in the conversation. I was like, "Not the point, Valeria. Back down." But that weighed on her. I've said how we've kept seeing little glimpses of her in the corner anytime it was a Cash and Valeria or a Cash at Missy scene. You'd see her reaction to it. She'd say a one-liner about it. Well, this was the most obvious it got, and I was like, no need to insert yourself in this conversation. Let Missy finish her story first, please.
It's really her reactions. It makes you want to be like, girl, no, you're smarter than this.
Yeah.
Because the even with her scene with Cash, and he is clearly giving jealous, and it has nothing to do with Gus reminding him of Austin, outside of Austin being the one Missy gave her attention to.
Hmm.
And so this idea, like you mentioned, he gets himself into messes. This is the mess. How are you trying to get yourself into a romantic mess on top of that?
Right.
And because the way he's lying to himself and Valeria, like trying to say like, no, I'm good with it. Like we can explore this. I was like, explore what? Why should she get into a relationship with a man who's clearly in love with her friend? But
Hmm.
he's trying it, and with Valeria, terrible romance advice she gave Tough. It's like, so you like you are great in the romance department. You definitely shouldn't have said anything to Tough about what he should have been doing with the man he was seeing. I had assumed that Julian was his boyfriend, but apparently that might not be the case. We might be in a situationship, I guess.
Hmm.
But the idea she's like, you shouldn't say too much. And I was like, well, that's gonna be hard for Tough because Tough says a lot. But also that's terrible. The man is on the road. He needs to communicate with him. Otherwise, what relationship do you have?
Right. I know. I had so many mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I do want to say it was really refreshing to see that opening scene where Tough and Valeria were talking about Julian. I was like, finally, finally, Tough and Valeria are talking about Julian, and it's not Tough and Julian talking about Valeria. I was like, finally, we're on the other foot here. Things are looking up. And it was just, first of all, the conflict is resolved mostly. So it was nice to see Tough and Valeria behaving like best friends for once. Like, we heard they've been best friends for so long and like not seeing the vision here, and we're finally seeing the vision. Um, but then they went and did that, and I was like, why? At first, I was like, what is wrong with Julian? Why is he being so frosty? Because the episode was very coy about it, and that we didn't get the whole story until the very end. And then when we did get the whole story, it's like, okay, now I kind of understand that. I wish I was more invested in the relationship, but that's just because the way we built it up towards this. This is the first kind of time it's any kind of had any kind of real spotlight, and then Valeria messed it up again. But bless Valeria for trying. Um, I mean, I'm glad we finally got them two to a place, both Tough and Valeria and Tough and Julian, and that it doesn't always feel like there's conflict or there's always unresolved feelings that we're not talking about. Yeah, both relationships were better off for this episode. But yeah, the whole like you don't need to talk to him as much and cut down the communication. And this is a very basic romance trope. I don't necessarily like when shows do that, especially since we've explored nothing with this relationship so far. I feel like there were other areas to go. We got there in the end. As you like to say, the boat was docked. The relationship's probably in a bit of a stronger position because of that. And yeah, the scene Tough and Julian had at the end was really, really nice. I'm not sure whether we needed to go through those basic through the motions to get there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it really was like through the motions because it is a basic trope. It's actually a trope that felt too young for them because this
Yeah.
is not a teen drama and this is not Tufts' first relationship or Julian's first relationship. So the idea that the advice would be, just don't really communicate, that feels like something that like your friend would tell you at the lunch table.
Hmm.
And not something that she would have told, a man. Like they're men. So I feel like the navigating communication while one is on the road is one thing. Saying, especially if you aren't a great communicator, which Tough was alluded to, at least in terms of long distance, because Villiers did say that he leaves people on red. He's just not great when it comes to phone communication. So, I mean, it would have been lovely if it was more so he needed to call Julian rather than text Julian, and that was the solution. But I agree though that it's great that the conflict for both of them had nothing to do with Julian being mad at Tough because Tough was investigating Valeria, and everything to do with Julian being mad about their relationship and how it had changed when he went on the road, and what does that mean for them. Um, Tough was so cute though, bringing him that steak sandwich.
Less is hard.
That steaks. It was the steak he took out of the box. I was like, that's too big for a sandwich. Did we cut the meat at least?
He was going to try. He was going to try to make amends, even if it's that size. I mean, like points for trying. That's why I agree that the arc itself didn't necessarily work then because Tough was trying, which is why when, of course, we go through the whole basic. I can't make it because of the we. I have to help launch the stadium, and then Julian had the basic response, I'll check my schedule. I was like, oh, that was a bit rough. I'll check my schedule. I was like, come on. Um, but yeah, we didn't. That's why maybe the whole Valeria offering advice wasn't necessary. She had enough going on in this episode. I don't really think she needed to be involved there. But like, I'm one of these days I'm going to stop coming after Valeria because I love the actress so much. She's so good at what she does. Um, but yeah, we got there in the end, and it makes for some beautiful moments. Like I said, the opening part with Tuff and Valeria was lovely. That closing scene between Tuff and Julian was lovely. We got there in the end. Everything fell into where it needed to be. It was kind of by the numbers getting there, if you know what I mean.
But it's not necessarily the weakest plot. I
No,
felt like the weakest plot for this episode was the Missy and is her name Polly?
I think so. Yes, which is pretty funny considering Tiara played Polly in Riverdale.
That plot, it was suffering. I felt like it needed to be in its own episode. Because it really was the heart of the episode is the rodeo. It's everything that Isabel is dealing with. And then you have, the different sides to do it with Cash in his hand and then Tough in his relationship and Valeria kind of being there for everybody. But with Missy, I was like, we don't know enough about Austin and y'all's relationship to be really invested in your pain. Because she was like, everyone's like, Austin wouldn't do that. I was like, I don't know what Austin would do. We didn't get a lot of flashbacks where he was shown in a warm way. Yeah, his
Mhm.
his his flashbacks generally are centered. Well, there's we met him in the first episode, and he wasn't really giving in terms of good seated character development, even in the short span of time that we knew him. And then the other flashback we saw him in was devoted to Cash's feelings.
Mhm.
So outside of him being like, I missed Missy while I was on the road, I don't know anything about their relationship. Like there's just nothing to hook into. It's very bland. So there's nothing. Missy's the actress who plays Tia is acting. She truly is.
Mhm.
She's eating in those scenes when she's going through Missy's grief and the disappointment and the fear that he did do something that would have tainted her memory of him. But I only really care about it in terms of her. Don't really care about it in terms of how um of Austin or how the family would feel. I don't know this man. It's just I'm like, okay, so sorry that happened if it did happen. We need to move forward for you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Austin's very much at the center of the story, and we still feels like we don't know an awful lot about him. And I feel like what they're trying to do should be clever in that we came into this point in a story where we don't know this person. So you know the way like when someone dies and then secrets are revealed, we've seen that on TV before, and then it's like everyone's like, oh, I never knew this person at all. They're definitely trying to go down that route by making us as viewers feel like that. But it probably would have been stronger if we did know Austin in the first place, so that everything we then find out shocked us to our core. Um, and it doesn't now because we don't really know him, and the flashbacks haven't been giving, like you said. Um, yeah, I agree. This episode started really strong for me because I really liked that scene between Missy and Isabel. I was like, women in grief together, so sweet. Like let's talk more. And then when you saw Missy deflecting, I was like, oh, we're going to be in for a long episode of denial. But then we weren't. She decided to phone this woman. I was like, let's set up. And the episode just did whatever it could to drag that storyline out to the end. Because I said last week jokingly, they were like, we can't reveal that yet. And well, this episode was all about, we can't reveal that yet because they couldn't reveal it right to the very last moment. That see, I every time I see a scene that kind of leans into something, I'm like, there's a purpose for that. There's a reason this person's here. There's like every Tough and Julian scene, I'm like, not servicing the relationship, but there's a purpose for the scene to do with the Valeria storyline. The only scene this whole series I felt like had absolutely no purpose whatsoever was Missy at the cafe waiting for this woman to arrive and she never turned up. No excuse for that, no reason for that. And then we just got the line at the end. She was like, I didn't want to tell you this. And I was like, not really buying that. Don't really feel like that added anything to the story. And so could we not just have had Missy in denial for a little bit longer and then decided to ring this woman towards the end? So then she could have gotten the fulfillment. There was no reason to drag this poor woman's arc out the whole episode. I don't really think that was necessary. We could have had her being worried about it and still be distracted from Cash. didn't need her to actually make an appointment with this woman and then her not to turn up. I don't think that added anything to the plot. Like you said, it just dragged it out for no reason. It gave nothing. And what technically is the main storyline in the show right now was a huge, or should I say the opposite of a huge, a very small subplot in this episode. Added nothing to it, in my opinion.
No, I mean, it seems like more on what was going on with Austin.
Hmm.
Like that's like the big mystery we seem to be now pivoting back toward as we're in the middle of the season now. So
Hmm.
like so that part makes sense, but it also feels like could have been a phone call. Like and it would have served the same purpose. Even if, Missy spent the whole episode like with her phone on her, waiting for the call, and
Yeah.
that provided the tension for her. Instead of, the Polly and her didn't meet up because Polly got scared, then Polly meets her at the house. Which, by the way, Missy's home on the property, beautiful, gorgeous.
Stunning.
That pullback that they did so that we could see all of it while she was talking to Valeria when she asked Valeria to move in with her. I was like, wow, she's in a gorgeous cabin out there. Like it's
Right.
stunning. I would like to spend more time there, like on the outside of it, just to see it because it was amazing. But moving away from decor, like from the beautiful outside of the house, it's just I don't know. It felt like it didn't serve Missy enough. Um, and hopefully, as we move forward, and we do figure out what was going on with Austin that night. Well, I know, but like when we do, when you get to that point, that it feels satisfying, and that you feel like they really did do their work. I know I was satisfied by the end,
Okay.
for that mystery. At least in terms of okay, I found that out, and I didn't feel like my time was wasted. I said, oh, okay,
Hmm.
cool. I do understand what was going on. Um, Outside of that, with this episode, it really does feel like a bridge episode. We talk about that sometimes on the pod, where there are episodes that sort of seem to serve a point. And this episode was getting us to the stadium.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, you're right. It was like an island that we had to land on before we get to the main plot of land that we're going for. Um, Yes. I think this the point of this episode was like we said, just to drag out the whole Missy storyline, give them something to distract them, give them something to distract her, and then focus on someone else's storyline for a while. I mean, in terms of that, it worked like a dream. It just wasn't outside of the stadium stuff, which was pretty like scintillating to watch in and of itself. It just didn't add as much to the overall storyline, if that makes sense. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like the Cash, no, wrong brother. I feel like the Austin twist, the twist itself wasn't obvious, but the fact that it wasn't actual cheating on Missy was kind of obvious because we built it up so much. I do have to ask, when you were watching it the first time round, did you see a different twist coming, or did you actually think it was going to be cheating?
I I wanted it to be cheating. But it was, which with this being a Hallmark show, I should have known that it wasn't.
Hmm.
But I wanted to be that because I felt like we needed to pump up the drama more. I wasn't really sure where we were going with Missy's storyline. And I wanted there to be, I felt like that would be a way for more exploration of Austin as a person if we were to know, like, not necessarily, obviously, it would have casted him in a bad light,
Hmm.
but to get backstory on who this woman is to him, that's what I wanted. Didn't get that. So in this episode, I was disappointed with
Hmm.
the reveal because especially because when you think about waiting a week for it, you're on tenterhooks. You're like, what was it? What happened? Only for the balloon to deflate. Like, oh, okay, well, great. You knew each other. You dated for a year. Didn't work out. Stayed in touch. And you're the reason why he got into some trouble. Awesome.
Hmm.
Where do I go now? Like,
Yeah.
where would I go from here?
It does feel like they kind of just dragged it out for the sake of this whole episode, just to give us something different at the end and move the story in a different direction. Um, yeah, I feel like that's the underlining point of this episode. It got there in the end. It did what it needed to do. For the most part, it was an enjoyable watch, but it did feel like we kind of had to press pause on the majority of the stories to get there. And before we move on, the one thing I did want to mention that I did really like is the fact, because we had an Austin-centric storyline in this episode, it brought the whole family together for the first time in who knows how long. Oh, I said last week, it's like all these people are living in the same space and yet never interact with each other. And we have finally had a scene in the kitchen for the first time in who knows how long, where we had Missy, Cash, Valeria, Tough, all talking about this. The scene where Missy opened up to Toph about if she thinks that Cash or the Austin might have been cheating. So many of these brothers, damn it, where she thought he might have been cheating. You got to see his reaction. It just we got to spend time with the family again. I thought that was a great tool also for swapping information in and out. As much as I didn't like Valeria's reaction to the whole oh, Missy and all, or Cash again, I did it. Missy and Cash again. We got to see people interacting with each other, different dynamics. Worked like a dream, and then seeing them all together in the rodeo preparing for the stadium pitch again, just nice to see them all working together. The show has a hugely talented ensemble, and we don't get to see them spend enough time together. So even though I did have issues with how this episode handled the storylines, the basic storylines in them brought everyone together. It made for some nice dynamics, which was such a welcome change of pace for me.
Very true. Even outside of the kitchen, the scene in the barn, no, the stables, when Isabel finds out, well, everyone finds
Yeah.
out about the hand. That burst of tension was fantastic. And it really did feel like, and no matter how old you are, when mom steps into the room and finds out something, there's that level of fear when you've been hiding something, and you could see it in all of them. And I think that was like just a great testament to the way the ensemble cast works well together. I did want to say before we do move on to wild cards that as far as bridge episodes go, because we're always talking about writing, that it's not a knock against the series. I feel like people who do write understand that sometimes it is what it is, like especially if it's an episode where it's just meant to push us toward where we're going.
hmm
And like that's totally fine. Everything isn't gonna be a banger. Nor should
hmm
it really be. But for me, episode six just is my least favorite. But it's serviceable. Like it does what it needs to do. There are just ways that it could have been better, but that's for a lot of things. Um,
Yeah. Definitely. It's
I
all about balance. I think Ride gets it pretty well.
it does. I feel like one day we should do a pod where we talk about writing.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
because all three of us do, right? So and I feel like I don't know about you guys who are watching. I have no idea or not if you think we're too critical at times, or not. I mean, we are critics, but a lot of it does come from a place of understanding what is supposed to happen in an episode and why it's not working.
hmm Yeah, and we do like to observe things, and we do like to compare it to other things that we've seen. And I think we're pretty fair in that. Like we said plenty of times about this episode, it does what it needed to do, and there's absolutely no issues with that. At the end of the day, it got to where it needed to go, and it services the plot, even if it doesn't always service the characters. And every television show has multiple episodes to do that. When you're making constant television, you just got to keep on top of it. And I think Ryan did a pretty fair job of it.
Hmm. That's true. And then sometimes you have to search a feeling. So moving into wild cards,
hmm
uh, when I was watching the episode, uh, I was wondering, do I have an issue with the dynamics in this episode, or am I just a viewer who prefers to see Max and Alice together because they're the strongest dynamic? And I think I'm erring on the side of the latter. Uh, I enjoyed the episode, but because they spent a lot of it apart, I wasn't as fulfilled while watching it as I was in previous episodes where they're together. Like, I kind of felt the same way about the surfing episode. So, which is an episode I enjoyed. But it is interesting though when you're sitting and you're watching and you're searching your feelings, and you're like, how much of this is a me problem and how much of it is an episode problem? And for me, episode seven was a me problem.
I totally get where you're coming from. That probably means it's a me problem too. Yeah, on that front, I had the exact same feeling. I love you made the comparison to the surfing episode because I had the exact same feelings about that episode. I was like, no, don't tell me we're coming up with excuses to separate them. Mostly, for the most part in that episode, it found a way to bring them together in the end. So when we separated them instantly in this episode, I was like, oh no, what are we doing? And then about a quarter of the way in, we found a way to reel them back into at least into each other's orbit. So it pulled it off in the end, but I know what you mean. Just the Max Alice dynamic is so rich. It feels like the show kind of suffers when it's not on screen. But this was a nice change of pace, like in terms of that. Like, I mean, like Jason Priestley, like how good was he? Like, when he got to, I love the fact that George got to basically show us where Max's talents come from. When he showed up as what was that man's name, fake name, Theo, when he showed up and just sent the sub teacher off so that Max could take her place. I mean, like Ellis made the comment. I can see where Max gets her talents from, but I mean, like we'd made that observations when we were watching it because he just switched up the dynamic, something serious, and yet it felt totally at home in what it was doing.
It did. I enjoyed my favorite was the was he she kept calling him chef, but I wasn't sure if he was like the rock star of cuisine or if he was an actual rock star.
I know, right?
But I mean that accent, which was flagging at points, which
Hmm.
made it even funnier, was so great. I think their dynamic was really awesome. You can tell kind of to me it felt like they're when they're just them, there's a lot of love, but a bit of awkwardness because of how long they've been apart. And
Hmm.
then, but as soon as they get to do a con, they're immediately like rolling. But like they
Yeah.
truly, it's just it's great. I like that. I don't know if it's an acting choice or if it was just something that happened naturally between Jason and Vanessa when it came to when these two are standing still and have to be together. The energy shifts just a bit. It's a little
Hmm.
more not tense, but it feels like when you're with a family member that you adore but you haven't seen and you're not falling back into the back and forth bantery thing that you do.
Hmm.
So I enjoyed that element of it. I also enjoyed being able to, like you said, it's an ensemble episode. We saw everybody. They're doing a bit more with Simmons and Yates, which I have been enjoying. I wish we had gotten it earlier in the season, but I think we didn't because they were really trying to establish Max and Ellis. So now that we are in the nearing towards the end of the season, we are seeing more about Simmons and Yates and their personalities outside of, them dragging the two of them.
Hmm. No, I totally agree. I think that was one of my favorite parts of the episode. And Sam, I never said this in last week's review. Sam was last week's episode. Yes, Simmons got involved in the murder case. Can't even believe I just said that sentence. Um, there was just so much going on that we felt like it was all of the characters came together. Like that scene in the precinct when Jason Priestley walked in, or George walked in with Alice. And they sat and watched Yates and Simmons who were on the computer, and all of them sat and watched the CCTV footage. I was like, oh wow, so many different dynamics here that we never really established. We were just getting used to George and Alice's sharing scenes together, and now they're sharing scenes with Yates and Simmons. Um, it was a team effort this episode. They all had something to do, which was just awesome to say. Um, I agree. I thought Yates and Simmons were a bit unnecessary to the plot early on in the show. Specifically, Yates is the woman character, am I right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yes. Specifically her, she was had very sharp one-liners, whereas you could see the like kind of banter between Simmons and Alice, and that they had a former relationship as partners, and that there was history there, whereas Yates was just kind of like funny cold for no reason. It was sharp. There was no warmth there. And then last week she got more involved in the case. You saw there was a bit of warmth. This week she started to feel a bit more like a well-rounded character. Yates and Simmons had their own scene without Max and Alice involved in it at all. They're starting to feel like actual people now, actual characters, and I really like that. I really do think the show has a really talented ensemble, and I do hope at least for the remainder of season one, if not in season two, we get to see them all interact more, but also just more established as characters. Because it was just, I think that was one of my favorite parts of the episode. I said it already, seeing more for Yates and Simmons, and three or four episodes ago, I don't think I'd ever have wanted that.
No, and I think it's because they gave the impression that every time we would see them, it would kind of just be jokey,
Hmm.
like it would. But no, there's depth for them that's coming. Like you mentioned, we didn't talk about it last for the last episode, but they had their own scene too when they found the body, and you kind of saw the way that they are as partners. Simmons seems more like the senior detective,
Hmm.
and they haven't necessarily mentioned that, but I think he is. It's just the way that he and Yates interact. He also seems he's very protective. He was protective of Ellis this episode. He seems like the person who wants to make sure his colleagues don't get in trouble or uh, aren't manipulated or in a situation like that teen was telling the truth. He was. But I did understand Simmons' position that like it's a team that Ellis's brother Daniel worked with. He's gonna be blind to whatever's going on
Hmm.
because and Jacques was great. doing those scenes. There was a real, I know there's that he's not lying to me because I know him because my brother worked on his case as a social worker. I was like, Ellis, that's not a lot of fruit on the vine there. I'm gonna trust the baby because I don't want to believe that he's lying. And I'm glad I stayed on that train because no one believes this child, and that's really hard to deal with, especially at
Hmm.
his age. But I was still like, oh, I really hope he's not lying to you.
Right, it did set it up really to be like an Alice-centric story, and it was. And I did like that because the last time we had an Alice-centric story, we did hear about the importance of losing his brother and the importance of anything to do with his brother, like what it did to him, unfortunately. Which again, grief. That's something that his former partner didn't understand. I'm not talking about Simmons. I'm talking about that woman whose name Rachel. Her name almost escaped me.
Mhm.
She didn't understand that. Um, uh, but this episode, as soon as it came up, you saw the chief get involved again, and he didn't want Alice getting involved. And I did really like this. Again, we're making the chief feel like more of a character as well, because he was just like, no, in the past. Whereas then when Max had that conversation with him, you understood why he said no. And now this week feels like we furthered that a little bit again, because Alice pitched himself to the chief, and the chief backed off a little bit and listened and was like, okay, you got a day. Of course, he didn't give him the 3 days he wanted. He gave him 1 day because that's what chief does. And you know what? Like, tough love, I get it, I suppose. But again, we had Simmons getting involved out of fear for Alice. We had the chief showing a little bit of apprehension for Alice. Again, it's starting to feel not as one-dimensional now. We know these characters have thoughts and feelings and actually do care about Alice. He's not the cop that we like to drag because he works on the boat, which we haven't seen him on the boat in quite a long time now because he's doing an awful lot of out of office work. So he's starting to reestablish those dynamics, which is great. Of course, we had Yates say, "Get out of my chair," and just to play with the dynamics. But there seems to be quite a lot of care for Alice in the office, which is what I wanted more of early in the show. So I'm glad we're getting there now. And who would have thought that Max had an awful lot to do with that? But you know what? Our queen is just changing hearts and minds on a day-to-day basis, and yeah, and I think that plays into the idea of this being a whole ensemble episode because her and George were kind of leading the charge there. I love the fact that it was George that noticed the coffee cup was missing or changed, and that the video was looped. These guys have talents, and I'm glad that it's not just Alice seeing that. The rest of the team is picking up on it now as well.
Mhm. I agree. I think that there is something about a character who continuously shows up for somebody else
Hmm.
where the entire workforce starts to change too. Because there's only so many times someone can be like, why are you acting like this? Like, this isn't a good look for you. And I think also, too, they've earned their somewhat some of their respect because they keep closing these cases. So there's only so many times like you guys don't know what you're doing. Well, that's clearly not the case because they're solving all of their murder mysteries. Like
Hmm.
it's all happening. This one was an intriguing case though, because it involved students at a preparatory school in a secret society, which is I've never heard them for high schools. They're usually for the colleges and the universities, but sure. The was it the Skull and Key or something?
Yeah, yeah.
And I did love how like we were at the Salvatore house. Like that's legitimately the legacy set, I believe. And I noticed when they were coming down the steps, it's like I've seen this staircase. I know what this is. And it's just so exciting that there's something, and I do believe it's because the showrunner just loves television that we are off if we're not getting references to popular, well-loved series in dialogue, we're getting it through set design,
Hmm.
or just being at locations that people can recognize and like be like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where you're like
Yeah,
like
right. Yep.
and that to have that set after coming off of a vampire episode that was also heavily influenced by the Vampire Diaries, it's just chef's kiss. Like
It's lovely. It's
it's
lovely
just
to
so
say.
joyful.
Yeah.
I can't I every episode I've got the biggest smile on my face
Yeah.
because it's delightful.
It is. It's so delightful for a CW fan as well because I know I didn't never dawned on me that it was the Salvatore house because I was watching it thinking I've seen this set on the CW before. I was like, is it the Queen Mansion? Is it the Luther Mansion? Where have I seen this before? That makes sense now. And it was so recognizable and it worked really well as that skull. Speaking while we're on the note of CW people, because we we like to call this out every week we see someone familiar. The Dean I recognized. They definitely played her up to be villainous because she's played villainous roles in the past. She played Damien Damien Dark's wife on Arrow, and the slightly shady district attorney on Kung Fu. So I was like, I've seen you before. You definitely, the show definitely hopes I've seen her before because she's played a villain in the past and she's acting pretty suspicious in this episode. Could she be the villain? And then we went on. It was like, okay, she's not the villain. She's just acting really suspicious for no reason because she did kind of shut down when Alice was asking her those questions. Um, and it was like, okay, I get that it's the dean has to shut down, but he asked you some normal questions that you didn't want to answer them. I was like, this is a kind of sus. No offense, man, but really. But of course, it said all the intention there was to roadblock Alice so that he had to go outside the box. And of course, anytime he has to go outside the box, he's gonna call Max. Um. I like the fact that she was like, she never hesitated a single moment when she found out that it was an important kiss to him. And I think that speaks volumes to their dynamic. I said a couple of weeks ago how he always has a sarcastic smile on his face when he's around her. It's gone beyond that now. He knows when he needs her and he knows how useful she is and he knows how well he gets on with her now. And it's gotten a great deal to the relationship. So much so that he never asked questions when George got involved. There was no scene in the episode like, hold on a minute, I'm not working with you, or anything like that. He just allowed George to get involved. He just goes with the flow when Max is involved. And you know what? It ended up benefiting that storyline because you see when she smacked that ruler on the table and it zoomed out and you saw that she was the teacher, I was like, oh, I'm going to love this episode. And I did.
Yes, and those they ran to their seats immediately. This is not a sub that you play with. But she's also, I love how that the dynamic was supposed to be. She's firm, but she listens.
Hmm.
And I know part of that was servicing the case. But her being so kind to that young lady who was carrying around the animatronic baby is in and even saying you're doing a good job. Like she's not she's not a legit parent, but she has to play a parent role. So she it's I'm sure it helped that young lady to hear that she's doing a good job with her mechanical baby. That like this project that they have them doing is working out for her. Also, she is a great mom. I mean, she's basically George though, because she was taking the baby on the crimes.
Yeah.
That part was I guess you can't leave the little one at home. So you're just gonna be on we're stealing and you're gonna be along for the ride. Great story to tell you when you're an adult robot. But
This is why we needed George in this episode lined up so well. But before we move past that, I have to tell you, I died when Max threw the baby out the window, and she was like, "I promise to look after it." I tell you, I died. Of course, Ricky was there to pick it up, but I mean, like, what a moment! Like again, such a beautiful, heartfelt moment, and just instantly followed by the smack you in the face kind of humor. I love this show so much. It's senseless, it's ridiculous, and like all these tones go together so well.
and it's surprising because I
Yeah.
didn't realize that they were on an upper level of the school.
No, Sam.
So when she threw the baby out the window, I thought it was gonna be a gentle, but she yeeted that thing. I thought it was like that's the way that they do comedic beats on this show, is so different than like it's a reminder of what network TV used to do a lot. But like the fact that we're back here, we're doing stuff like that is just amazing. Like for fans of television, it's just and it is really enjoyable and delightful. And we still get to also have important conversations like for instance with George and Ellis in the car.
Hmm.
Now I am Team Ellis in many things. Him and the way that he talks about Max's parents, not a fan of it. Did love that George got to say how many kids have you raised? Because
Hmm.
not a one. He's got zero. But and that's not to say people who don't have children cannot give advice. But
Oh
the way
yeah.
that he was talking, it was the judgment. I get being judgy because her father is a criminal, but to say that he's not a real parent because he didn't provide the structure that his father did, I was like, oh, Ellis, that's a he his response to that was George's response to that was very calm. And if he had popped off in the car, it would have been understandable. How dare you say that he's not a real father?
Yeah, oh, the tension in that scene. I tell you, I was gripping the side of my sofa as soon as he said that. I was like, no, no, why did you go have to go and say that? Y'all were getting on so well. But it was very rude the way Alice said it. I mean, like George, come on now. as though we expected George to follow what he meant. And poor George stayed there, pretended to be naive. It was like, oh, whatever do you mean, sir? So that the more Ellis had to explain himself, the worse he sounded. And like, so it really didn't help. I agree. Like, Alice doesn't know George all that well. And at the end of the day, a police officer should know not to incite a situation further. And when George was out on, let's call it probation, if when George was out for a couple of days, you should not be angering that man. And George responded with the excuse me. I was like, oh no, 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 don't go down this route. The show surprised me, and it had George calmly, collectively, and considerately think about how to outsmart Alice in that conversation. And oh my goodness, did he do a wonderful job? That storyline where he asked where he revealed how Max came home and told him about her first kiss and her first crush, and how Alice was afraid. He just never shared that with his own father. Again, we're going back to the whole Alice and his dad. What was the relationship like there? Alice in his head had a good father, and I'm not saying that he didn't, but the fact is that he saw that maybe Max had a warmer, more successful relationship with her father, even though the fact that they were cons. So I mean, like, I think Alistair learned a lot from that conversation about not passing judgment just because of what the surface layer stuff looks like, and you have to look beyond that sometimes. And I think Matt and George did a wonderful job of that because here he is, this kingpin of this prison that he's in. He's so well got. He has all these sneaky things he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have access to that mobile phone that he constantly talks to Max on. He's basically running the show in there. You'd think this man was not to be trifled with. And yet that conversation played out like a gentle father, calmly outsmarting someone who is rude to him. Like, this is a George Stan account. Love this man so much.
Yes, very much so. And I think that it is interesting though the parent talks that Wild Cards has because Ellis is very much put into positions where he's not always right, he's not always wrong.
Hmm.
So like it reminded me of the bench conversation where
Hmm.
I did agree with him that Max is sort of sugarcoating the loneliness that would have came with always being the one left behind as her parents run cons. But this time I didn't agree with him because it's just not fair. You know, Max is clearly a woman who grew up in a loving home and
Hmm.
she has a great relationship with her father. And there is something to be said for people who do prefer. It seems like Ellis came from a family where his parents were his parents; they were not his friends, and
Hmm.
there was a clear line there, clear delineation. Um, and that is a style of parenting that some people prefer. But it's also true that even with that case, there are people who grew up in that dynamic, but they still feel comfortable talking to their parent. Um, so like Ellis, your father was your father. We don't know him. So we're only hearing one side of the story, but it's clear that from your perspective, he's not a man that you could have a conversation with. He's not a man you could open up to. And it's funny that he respects that style of parenting or doesn't have any issues with it when it's clear that if Ellis were to have children, he would not raise them the way that he would raise them, his father raised him and his brother. He'd raise them like George raised Max.
Yeah.
It's obvious that that's the case because he's got the biggest heart. The ending scene, instead of us being with him and Max, we had him and the teenager, and they were having a lovely conversation.
Hmm.
And the teen got to joke and laugh, and they got to be open. And he's not a father figure for him, but he was sort of playing a role of being an older man in his life who was there to talk to him and give him the space to be who he is.
Yeah, I thought that was a really important moment for Alice because we did hear, was it the pilot episode or one of the early ones, where he said to Max that his brother was so good with children and so good with younger people and so good with being cool to teenagers, which is something that Alice has always thought he struggled with. But I'm pretty sure that JJ thought he was pretty cool in that closing moment, in those closing moments when the two of them were getting on. Alice is kind of a cool guy. He really is. You can see when you break through that prickly exterior, there's a real like warmth from him. Like, it didn't take long for Max to do it. It actually didn't really take long for George to do it. You see, they're pros at what they do. But like, there's a lot of warmth coming from Alice, and he's very well got. He's very well loved by the people he works with, even if Yes and Simmons would never admit it. Um, so I agree with you totally. I do think if he was a parent, he would be far more like George than he'd care to admit. And I think one conversation with George really solidified that for him because him and George got on very, very well after that. Like, I love the joke when George like had his phone waiting for him. He was like, "Give me that," because again, that's what they're good at. But like, if that was episode one, Ellis would have been wound far more tightly. He would have been far less fun, having far less fun with the conversation, with the situation. And like, look at it now, holding full scale conversations with these two, kind of having the time of his life, even if he won't admit it. These two characters have changed Ellis a great deal, and I think he's a lot more like them than he'd care to admit.
Because they are warm people, and
Hmm.
he's attracted to warm people. Um, I feel like with Alice, there's a for him, there's a how he's supposed to be and how he really feels.
Hmm.
And Max and George bring out how he really feels. And he gives they give him space to be the way that he naturally is. He's naturally loving. He's naturally willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that is a good trait to have in a person, especially a good trait to have in an officer. Someone
Hmm.
who meets you as a person first before they meet you as a suspect.
Definitely. And I think that's the importance of why this show, I keep saying the beauty in this title, double entendre, triple entendre, so many meanings to the term of wild cards. But Ellis was thrown he was like thrown out of the frying pan and what he thought was going to be into the fire. He's completely out of his element in a situation like that. And it's only when you realize when you take away all those conventions, all that construction that formed him into the officer or the person that he was, you get to see a bit more of who he really is on the inside. And I think the longer this goes on, the more he's enjoying that. So much so that when we reach that turning point, when we reach that the end of the road point, he probably won't want to go back to what his life was like because he's had so much fun in this way. And you know what? I think that's kind of beautiful, which is not necessarily a word I would have used to describe wild cards in the beginning, but the beauty of the show, right?
Yes, I think also because how do I want to put this? There's just so much growth in every episode.
Hmm.
For really all of the characters, as we the further we move into the season, the more they all seem to grow and be comfortable and be themselves. I think, I mean, even JJ, right? Like JJ was not wound up, but he was very guarded the entire episode, as he would be because he was protecting somebody that he cares about. Um, but also, chip on his shoulder because it, he hasn't been treated well by the system
Hmm.
or adults. And the fact that he did trust what Daniel said speaks to how much respect he had for Alice's brother, and to Alice to recognize that and continue to give him the benefit of the doubt is something that he need. Uh, and to have that conversation with I don't remember the young man's name, but his boyfriend.
Hmm.
Um, to be able to, he was there present, and JJ felt comfortable talking to that young man, and I was happy that he broke up with him.
Hmm.
Because him not being out, it wasn't the issue. It was the fact that I got caught up in some mess, and I would protected you. And it just, we're not in a place where I don't want to throw my life away, doing that. I appreciated that conversation that they had.
Hmm.
Um, because it really was about JJ prioritizing himself. Even when
Yeah.
even at like the loss of the care he would have gotten in a romantic relationship. I was like, oh, if teenagers are watching this at the same time, this would be great too. That to show that like even when you really like someone, if they get you in some mess, leave. Everything can't be Bonnie and Clyde.
It was, yeah, this episode, so much growth for everyone. I agree totally because that relationship, I kind of caught on that this is where
Mhm.
this was going because there were if JJ was asking about him, he was asking about JJ. I was like, okay, I see where this is going. And then at the end of the episode, I was like, this relationship hasn't had enough time to breathe, to grow. And at the end of the day, this guy did the wrong thing and he got him JJ implicated in this. I was like, can we really have a happy ending here? I know JJ deserves it, but can we really? So yeah, I completely understood why he made that decision, and I thought there was Ellis was trying not to look while that conversation was being had. Like you could feel the pride radiating off him that he chose himself, that he chose to be happy, and that at the end of the day he was protecting someone. Even well, I'm not saying that person didn't deserve protection, but he got himself caught up because he was doing what he felt was the right thing, and I thought that was a real moment of pride for Ellis because again there was you could feel the warmth radiating off him. And again, the dynamics in the show, man. If there's a character in an episode in a single episode or a character in four episodes, so the dynamics and the relationships between them are so well developed. It was the same way when Rachel came on board for that episode. You could definitely sense the history between her and Alice.
Yeah, they're complex,
Hmm.
even for Case of the Week episodes. There's a real complexity to the dynamics when they're close to one of the characters, or, even between the two, whoever is having a relationship in the show, no matter if it's romantic or platonic or it's familiar, there's just something about the complexity that they put into these relationships where you kind of care about them, you
Hmm.
know, um, even with them being, they're just going to be in there for that one episode, like with that young man and JJ. Because it really was about you didn't respect your bond enough to not steal his drone.
Yeah.
Like that's the only reason he's even caught up in the mess is because you stole his drone and you were stealing. Like I'm glad like they and the to talk about there were like underlayers about privilege too. And in this conversation about how like JJ's not like them. There is no moneyed parent who's gonna show up and get him out of some mess.
Hmm.
This is his path forward to having the life that is going to be better than the life that he was born into. Um,
Yeah.
and so like that, you can always tell when someone can't recognize with that. But this will be even though it's a fictional character, this will be a moment of growth for that young man who did that. Because then you kind of understand. In the same way that they planted the seed with the retiring teacher, pay the teachers. That's one of the
Yeah.
things. It was an interesting, they didn't really talk about it, but it is true that actually teachers at private schools aren't paid well.
Hmm.
Like it's not just the public schools, like the at private schools too, they're not paid well. So he was the villain, but it also struck a chord in terms of like this also happens because it's ridiculous that like I am fostering the minds of the future of Canada, but I can't buy groceries on the pension that I have
Yeah.
from all the years that I had spent teaching these young minds.
Yeah, it definitely shone a spotlight on that. And you did feel for the teacher, even though he was in all of like three scenes. You understood his motivation, even though again, of course, the episode portrayed him as like the villain doing all the stealing here. I do have to ask, did you figure out that it was him by any chance?
I he was the only one left. He was the only option.
That's exactly what I
Yeah.
was thinking. Yeah, because obviously the dean was acting suspicious. The kids went back into that house, and I was like, "Tell me we're not doing this again. Come on now."
But the
And
twist
then
was great.
the twist was wonderful because when the lights came on, I was like, "Oh, you've been caught." And then all the clapping, I was like, "Okay." I said this is an ensemble, but we're really going in on the ensemble now. We're bringing some of the suspects into the storyline as well, which was great. Yeah, he was the only semi-regular character who hadn't been shown again since, and we hadn't cleared his name, so I figured we were going there because I said when during a ride review, every scene has a purpose. That strange scene where he was asking the dean for the auditorium, and she was like, "Actually, no, someone paid to use that." I was like, "We have a purpose here. There has to be a purpose for that scene," and of course, that's what it was. Again, of course, you felt for that man or whatever, but it was an interesting it's an interesting spin on the typical storyline, like you said, there's depth to it, there's awareness raising about it, and then the show balanced that really well with the like tongue-in-cheek kind of storyline we were going with, because the fact that he was getting the stuff from the bag by reaching up from like the manhole that was sharp and he cut himself during it. I mean, like the effort that goes into writing these capers is just something else. And speaking of like writing, I love that line, cuff this man so I can take my father to breakfast from Max. Just broke the serious moment. Yeah, we went with it totally.
Yes, when she said that, I was like, Max, do you have the authority to direct another officer to arrest anybody? But like the line delivery from Vanessa was so great there. Did you? So I had like a question mark moment when George said that he and Max would never use children to do their bidding, and I was like, was she not trained from a young age to be a con artist? Is this supposed to be sarcastic or are you being serious?
Yeah, that was a bit strange. I didn't catch it the first time, and then I was writing the line down on my phone, my notes afterwards, like, but she was a child. I was like, huh? So I know what you mean, because the delivery from Jason Priestley was so good. Me and my daughter have done some cons, but we've never used children. And Max was sitting there backing him up. I was like, what a double act. But at the same time, was it a double act or was he being truthful? Because I mean, like, Max learned from the best. She is the best because she learned from the best. And like, so are we saying she wasn't involved in capers when she was younger? When was a worthy age to deem her of being involved in these capers? Yeah, I didn't quite get that. I mean, it works in the show 100%. But yeah, that's a good point. It does feel like a bit of a conflict there, doesn't it?
It does, but I'm wondering if there's if we might have made some assumptions like as audience members about when exactly she started conning. Because she
Hmm.
also says well he did internalize what Ellis had said about how she wouldn't have had a choice because this is basically
Yeah.
family business. But she said she did. So I'm like, were you like 18 and you decided to con because she's a grown woman, so she's like late 20s, at least. And that perhaps she actually hasn't been in the business as long as we think she's been in the business for, because I thought they would have had her running cons at 5. Like she would have been like the crying young girl in the bank as her parents are doing whatever in the back. Um,
Hmm.
but maybe that's not the case.
Hmm. It is interesting to think about, isn't it? Because you kind of get the vibe that Max spent her whole life doing this, but at the same time, like you said, maybe she hasn't. Maybe she picked it up not like into her teenage years or whatever. I know because it definitely like this show's so extra. You could imagine her like I was going to say it in the air vents, but we already had that in one of the episodes. You could imagine her as a kid sneaking into the air vents or squeezing through the small spaces that her parents couldn't have gotten through. But maybe they didn't use her as maybe they didn't use her for that until she was much older. Maybe she wanted to get involved. No, I agree with you. I do like what you said there that George did take what Alice said to heart. Not right away, but you did see at the end that last scene was so layered because of course there was their goodbye. Um, but they had a good time. They had a fun time, and yet it was kind of a serious scene. None. Of course, they didn't look happy to be leaving each other. But like George did the whole gentleman when he walked in, because just given the assumption that he knows the place, and he went back to his life. But Max walked off with kind of a serious "See you soon, Dad," and I was like, "There's what that was intentional. That was more somber than it needed to be." So I'm like, does this go back to whatever they're planning together? Does this go back to why she has that USB drive? Is there an overall arc here that she thinks she can use information to get him out of prison sooner? You know what I mean? I feel like there's a lot going on there behind the surface that's not just, oh, my dad's going to be released soon, because we don't actually know how soon he's going to be released, and do we?
No, we don't. Obviously, he's been in there enough time to create a new ecosystem for himself to move
Hmm.
around in, but we don't know how long his sentence is. He's not up for parole because that'd be a conversation. Uh, I read somewhere that he wound up in jail while they were both running a con, and I was like, oh, I couldn't remember that.
Mm.
So that would mean that would add a layer of guilt for Max because she'd gotten free and he didn't.
Hmm.
So which I think would, push her to want to get her dad out either legitimately or through a con means. So I don't know. It is interesting. You're right. It's very serious. My brain was on during the scene, but half of it was focused on him going down the staircase because I, again, watched too many procedurals. I was waiting for the jail to explode. Even though I know like that one, like that one section to just go up in flames for no reason. Um, and this is not that show.
Hmm.
But I did think about that because that's generally how those somber goodbyes go. I was like, why did the dial on the phone turn down? Usually
Hmm.
that means something tragic is about to happen. But they parted ways and it was fine. Nothing blew up. No one stabbed him. No, he was not dragged off by a guard. He just went down the stairs.
Yes, he did. He reminded us that he owns that place. Let's be honest. He walked off with style and charisma. It does make you wonder. I feel like whatever they were planning in that first episode might have to do with him getting out. Because Max did say when they were cheersing at the start of him being released, it was like, hopefully by your birthday next year, you will be here. And of course, you were supposed to think that, okay, maybe he'll be out full time in a year from now. But if that's not they're being intentionally coy with that. If that's not when a sentence is finished, I wonder if Max is going to do some like under the table things to try to get him out. And it does make you wonder if the USB pen will be involved, or whatever their overall scheme that they're plotting is has to do with that. There's more than meets the eye with these two. There always is. But as we head towards the finale, I guess we're going to find it out sooner rather than later.
That's true. That's one thing to keep in on track of. The other being that Max and Ellis should be coming up towards the end of their 2 month
Hmm.
agreement of working together, which the way TV works, that means whatever she's scheming is going to be timed right
Yep.
to that end date. And it's going to change everything most likely.
Yeah, I'm so ready for the season finale. Don't get me wrong, I'm excited for the two episodes before it, but I'm so ready for the finale because it's dealt with, it's packed in a heck of a lot and dealt with very little of it. So I assume it's all going to come up in the finale, and I can't wait to see how it all explodes. Hopefully the prison won't go with it, but I cannot wait to see it because there's so much nuance, there's so much stuff that we haven't dealt with yet. Because of the show's tongue-in-cheek kind of tone, I guess we're finally going to deal with it in the finale. And I'm just so ready for some absolute mess because this show handles that so well.
Yes. Though in the meantime, though, we do get to enjoy episode 8 when it comes out, which is the trope of all tropes. They are fake married. It's going to be delicious.
I'm ready. I'm ready. We talked about how hopefully at one point they'll have to con someone into believing that they're together. Obviously, we had kind of had a bit of the beginnings of that in the pilot episode. This is our moment. This is what we've been waiting for. Let's have an absolute blast next week.
Yes, of them bickering while in couples therapy.
Yes, I'm ready.
But that is it for this week's pod, you guys. Thank you for watching. We're the CW Spiral. I'm Sabrina.
I'm Michael.
Bye, y'all.